Liberals exposed for secretly spying on Canadians and stealing data. What they don't want you to know. Canada is facing a crisis of trust as the Trudeau government, with Mark Carney now front and center as finance minister, reveals disturbing patterns of disregard for privacy, accountability, and effective governance. The mounting scandals reveal a government increasingly detached from the needs and rights of its citizens, with troubling abuses occurring behind closed doors. The fallout from these issues is only now starting to ripple through public consciousness as Canadians begin to understand how deep the rot truly runs. Affordable housing, once touted as a pillar of the Liberals' social agenda, is a glaring example of policy gone wrong. Nearly 40% of the housing units built under the federal Affordable Housing Initiative were not only poorly located but also priced based on inflated market rents rather than on the income levels of those in need. This means that the very populations these homes were supposed to serve, low-income families, seniors, and newcomers, were effectively shut out. The result is a housing crisis made worse by misguided government policy, where affordability is a hollow promise defined by market forces rather than real accessibility. Mark Carney's attempts to shift blame to Conservatives are hollow, considering his party has held power for the last decade and overseen these failures firsthand. Beyond housing, the security of Canadians' personal information has been flagrantly compromised. The RCMP, the very agency tasked with protecting Canadians, recently lost an unencrypted USB stick containing thousands of sensitive records, including the identities of witnesses, victims, and informants. This breach is not only reckless but also dangerous, exposing vulnerable individuals to potential threats and exploitation. The fact that such a critical failure was barely addressed by officials highlights a troubling pattern of negligence. Instead of immediate accountability and corrective measures, the incident was quietly buried, signaling to Canadians that their safety and privacy are not priorities. Procurement practices within the federal government have also come under intense scrutiny. Repeated audits have exposed a culture of favoritism and corruption, with contracts being awarded without proper competitive processes. These sweetheart deals funnel taxpayer money to well-connected insiders and preferred vendors, undermining fairness and transparency. What's worse, despite clear violations of the law, no one has been held accountable. Auditors raise red flags, media outlets report the issues, but the government moves on without meaningful consequences. This lack of accountability feeds a growing cynicism among Canadians about the true cost of corruption and mismanagement. Even seemingly innocuous government services have become vehicles for intrusive data collection. The WeatherCan app, intended to provide Canadians with weather updates, was quietly harvesting massive amounts of personal data without user consent. Over 715,000 Canadians unknowingly had their device information, emails, and feedback monitored and stored. Rather than focusing resources on improving the app's functionality or user experience, the government paid nearly $200,000 to a private company simply to analyze this data, effectively turning a public service into a surveillance tool. This breach of trust is emblematic of a government willing to compromise privacy for data-driven agendas. This invasive trend extends back to the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, when the federal government tracked the location data of approximately 33 million Canadians via their cell phones. This mass surveillance occurred without consent or transparency, justified only by vague public health claims. Rather than admit error or stop the practice, officials sought to extend this intrusive monitoring for years to come, suggesting an obsession with control over citizens' freedoms. This reveals a disturbing willingness to prioritize surveillance and data collection over fundamental rights, further eroding public trust. The corruption scandals surrounding the ArriveCan app perfectly encapsulates this government's dysfunction. The Liberals awarded $64 million in contracts to GC Strategies, a two-person firm with no IT credentials, for a product that was widely criticized for failing to function effectively. This questionable contract is now the subject of an RCMP investigation, underscoring the severity of the mismanagement. Despite Mark Carney's claims in Parliament that his government upholds best-in-class procurement, his close ties to Justin Trudeau and his economic advisory role during the scandal make such statements difficult to take seriously. The same faces remain in power, merely repackaged, continuing the cycle of mismanagement and cover-ups. While Canadians grapple with government overreach and corruption, the criminal justice system is under siege by Liberal policies that undermine public safety. Peel Region Police made the largest cocaine seizure in Canadian history, yet 6 of the 9 suspects arrested were granted bail almost immediately. This is a direct consequence of the Liberals' soft-on-crime approach, embodied in Bills C-5 and C-75, which have weakened bail rules and reduced sentencing severity. The result is a justice system that seems to prioritize leniency for dangerous offenders over the safety and peace of mind of Canadian communities. Compounding these issues is the widespread abuse of Canada's immigration system. Tens of thousands of individuals enter the country on student visas, but never attend classes, instead exploiting these permits to engage in business ownership or work illegally. Despite clear legal provisions in the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act that impose penalties for such misrepresentation, enforcement is lax to non-existent. The government's unwillingness to act fosters an environment of impunity, further complicating the challenges faced by Canadian communities and legitimate newcomers alike. Taken together, these crises expose a government that has become comfortable operating without transparency, accountability, or respect for citizens' rights. It's not simply a matter of mismanagement, it's a systematic failure to uphold the principles of good governance. From privacy violations to unchecked procurement fraud, from the weakening of public safety to the neglect of immigration enforcement, the message is clear. Rules and laws are being ignored or twisted to serve the interests of those in power rather than the public good. This degradation of democratic accountability should alarm all Canadians, regardless of political affiliation. The creeping surveillance state, the corruption and cronyism, and the erosion of justice are not partisan issues. They strike at the core of Canadian values. What began as occasional missteps now looks like a deliberate strategy to consolidate power and evade responsibility at great cost to public trust and safety. It's time to demand real consequences. Ministers and officials responsible for corruption must face legal repercussions. Surveillance programs must be halted unless subject to strict oversight and genuine consent. Immigration laws should be enforced rigorously to protect the integrity of the system. And the justice system needs reform to prioritize the safety of Canadians over ideological softness. Mark Carney and the Trudeau government have polished their rhetoric and tried to deflect blame, but Canadians see through the facade. The government's failure to protect privacy, safeguard taxpayers' money, and enforce the law is glaring and unacceptable. Canadians deserve a government that serves them, not spies on them, nor steals from them, nor lets crime run rampant. The time for complacency has passed. The people demand accountability, transparency, and above all, respect.